Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast, a weekly podcast whose mission is multifaceted. Each week when you tune in, you will find episodes that question best practices, challenge music education dogma, facilitate conversations about touchy topics, demonstrate pedagogies, and conversations where colleagues learn from each other. This is episode 235, The Technique of Expressive Singing with Donald Brinegar. I often see technique and expression discussed as opposite sides of the coin. This couldn't be further from the truth. The technique unlocks the expressive capacity. Don's appearances in the past on this show on tuning systems and pitch matching also have been very popular with colleagues, so check out the links to those in the show notes. Many singers and conductors focus on interpretation and expression, but without the right technical foundation, true artistry can never fully develop. Imagine trying to teach a singer how to be expressive without first ensuring that they have the technical control to execute it. That's like asking someone to paint a masterpiece before they even know how to hold a brush. In this episode, I sit down with Donald Brinegar to explore the structure and technique that lay the foundation for expressive, effortless singing. We dive into breath efficiency, resonance, articulation, mental clarity or audiation, all crucial elements in developing a truly flexible and expressive voice. This is jam-packed, as every episode with Don has been, with useful information and things that are going to make you a better teacher or singer tomorrow. Attention event organizers. Ludus is here to take your events to the next level. Imagine a ticketing platform that's not just about tickets. Ludus offers marketing, fundraising, and even volunteer management, all in one place. It's time to streamline your event management process and impress your attendees. Join the Ludus family today and unlock endless possibilities for your events. Go to ludus.com/Choralosophy and try it out now, free to you. And if you use that link, you'll get the marketing feature free to your customers as well. We all love to travel with our students, but we definitely don't love planning a trip. I know I've been there as the point person for details, and it is a nightmare. Forms, payments, fundraising, it's a never-ending task that takes away from doing what we love. That's where Kaleidoscope Adventures comes in. They've been planning performance trips for more than 30 years and handle all the details from start to finish. And one of the best parts about Kaleidoscope, they have crowdfunding options for every traveler. Contact Kaleidoscope Adventures at mykatrip.com to find out how they can take your travel beyond expectations. You could chip in here for $3 a month and make a real difference in my ability to continue doing this show into year 2025 and beyond. So you can go to patreon.com/Choralosophy to sign up there, or you can just upgrade your free Substack subscription to a paid Substack subscription. Either way, the money goes to the same place for the same purpose. The producers and inner circle at Patreon are Venture Studios, Brian Long, Angie Schilling, Danelle Eckert, David Kowalczyk, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Herron, and Steve and Kathy Kokacek. Don Brinegar, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. My third time. I'm honored.
I know. You're in an elite club.
Well, thank you so much. And I sure enjoy your podcast. I get to listen to so much rich material, and it's been a really special place for the choral folks to have a dedicated platform to talk about all the things that we do, teaching, psychology, making the world better, and being good musicians. So I appreciate this opportunity.
Absolutely, and I appreciate that. We're coming up on, in fact, about the time that the audience hears this episode, we will have just crossed over 6 years on the show.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Amazing.
All right. So you have a book that has a concept. The title of the book is really interesting. First of all, the APROARTE, what does that mean? That doesn't even sound English.
It's not. APROARTE is an anagram standing for audiation, posture, respiration, onset, resonance, technique, and efficiency and eloquence. It's a way, Chris, of looking back at kind of the older model that there was two ways to approach the teaching of voice. The Gestalt theory, which is, you take a person as they are and you fill in the gaps from the German meaning form. And then the mechanistic approach, which means every student starts at point A and every student goes to B. And I think my first three teachers all started with breathing exercises and doing things in a somewhat orderly fashion. I came to singing as a trumpet player, so breathing wasn't really the issue. It was breathing correctly for being a singer and not a trumpet player that became the issue. And so APROARTE is something I invented so that it would stick in a person's mind as they're teaching. Are the elements that a singer must have all there, number one? And two, I discovered that even going back as far as Garcia, the approach of the bel canto folks was to make sure that if this element was there, then it led to this element. But if this element wasn't there, you couldn't progress forward. So we call that a nested hierarchy.
Yes, okay. So that was going to be one of my first things to ask about, because the part of the title that grabbed me is actually that subtitle at first when I saw your book online, and it's the nested hierarchy, or a nested hierarchy of expressive singing. And so talk to us a little bit more about what it means to have the hierarchy be nested when we're talking about just the term in general. You hinted at it a second ago, but let's dig into that a little bit more.
For instance, people will address resonance fairly early on, but if your breath coordination or your posture are not established in a way to allow great resonance to take place, then you're kind of wasting your time spinning your wheels. So this works in two ways. One, it's a way for a singer to address their own personal issues in a constructive and orderly way, but it's also a great hearing point of view for the teacher, because I have to say, well, their posture is creating most of these problems, or their onset is an issue, and they happen in order. And I've had a fair number of doctoral students challenge the concept, because I call it a nested hierarchy, not the nested hierarchy, because I believe there could be many approaches to great results. It just, for me, this is the discipline I follow in my own voice. You know, I'll be 75 here in a month, and I still sing. So that must credit some ability of efficiency and balance and coordination. And I also have been fascinated my whole life with the idea of work. The old idea of work smart, not hard. And when we hear an intense, beautiful, expressive sound, in our younger years, we interpret that as kind of screwing up the whole body to put energy into it. And like athletes have to learn, there's a certain level of balance. Some people would say relaxation. I would call it more purposed muscle intention, that the muscles are allowed to work together in a very efficient manner. In fact, if you look at some of the great singers of the world, it just doesn't look like they're working very hard, does it?
Right.
And yet they produce this amazing amount of sound because they have discovered the idea of the singer's formant, and they've discovered how to shape vowels in a way that flow from one to the other flexibly, and they appropriately use consonants, and they understand their own tessitura. I mean, all these issues come into play. So for me, APROARTE represented an organized way I could make sure I kind of checked off all the boxes in my head, so that when a student, for instance, is working too hard, where's the work coming from? And why are they working so hard when they could work less hard to produce a more expressive sound?
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm thinking of it in the terms now that you're laying out, or kind of in the framework that you're using for this nested hierarchy. And I'm thinking immediately at the school choir level, where we're teaching kids who are beginners. I know that probably the most common out of order thing that I see with teachers of young singers is we're going to talk to them so much about how to breathe, but then, as you mentioned the onset before, if the vocal folds don't touch when they make sound, it doesn't, all the air leaks out anyway. So we have to get to that.
Yeah, William Bernard said in one of my first lessons, once he found out I was a brass player, he said, teaching breathing is a 15-minute problem. Spending more time on it than that is really a waste of time, and just develop self-consciousness. And in fact, I've worked my whole life to say, how can I teach breathing to anybody and get them to phonate with a good onset with the least number of words? As you have come to know me, excuse me, I tend to focus on being pithy rather than wordy, although my explanations might be a little wordy right now. But I discovered that there's things we do in our everyday life which inform how to breathe, because all breathing happens at the unconscious level. Otherwise, excuse me, I need to take a breath. Otherwise, we'd have to interrupt the flow. Excuse me, I need to take a breath. We'd have to interrupt the flow of our thinking in order to do the mechanics. Excuse me, I need to take a breath. To take a breath, right? Well, we don't think about that, but suddenly we sing, and all of a sudden we're thinking about it all the time. And I find it rather destructive rather than instructive, under the idea that we want to develop awareness, but not self-consciousness. And so the one technique I have, and I explained it well in the book, I think, is to take your hand and blow a little air. Well, if you blow a little air, you may do it too, you'll find that the air is cool. Well, the question is, why is the air cool? Because it's not emanating from your lungs, it's emanating from the ambient air in your mouth. And therefore, you're just repeating the temperature of the environment. But if you take your hand and, without making any noise, take a breath as if you're going to fog up your glasses, you immediately notice your throat opens, your neck enlarges, your chest lifts up, and your abdomen descends because of the push of the diaphragm. You've just taken the perfect breath for singing. Now, emit only the hot air without any other muscular action. And we all know how to do that. So I often say to my singers, sing with more hot air. And that fixes so many things, because you'll notice that when you go to just blowing air, the posture collapses. But when you go to the hot air, your posture becomes expansive, exactly what we want in our posture. And then if you onset from that point of view, hi, hey, hey, by using hot air and no other muscular action, you almost get perfect onsets in the very first lesson. And how many of us have spent years trying to find that? And that leads to the semi-occluded constants that I quote in the book, which take all the articulators to their full range of motions. Because where the muscularity happens in singing is usually in the articulators, not in the rest of the body.
Yeah. Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think what ends up happening a lot of times is that we misdiagnose when the singer is, let's just say, take something as simple as the phrase is 4 measures and the singer is having trouble and they're running out of breath every 2 measures. Well, I guess the solution is they need to take a bigger breath. Well, no, that's probably it's probably not what it is.
I had a teacher very early on describe it this way: you've got the pitcher full, you're full of air, and you're very carefully trying to ease it out, and of course you slop it all over everywhere. So generally you'll find a consonant or a vowel or a sequence of flow of vowels is causing the air to pop out, and the muscles that control the exhalation of air now have become so tense that they feel like they have lost their air. In fact, probably 75% of all the air they took in the first place is still in their lungs. Mm-hmm. And as I tell them, we don't use very much of the air that we take in our lungs to sing a beautiful phrase or even a powerful phrase. It's somewhere between 8 and 12%, and at max about 25% airflow. And that's been tested and proven fairly often. Even if you've got up to 50% airflow going out, you still have 50% left in the tank. So one of the drills I use, I say, blow out all your air. Now sing the phrase as long as you want with no air. And they find they can do it effortlessly. Well, you didn't take a breath. How could you possibly do that? Right. Because there's that much breath in the lungs. It's a gross thing to say, but the last thing you're going to do on this earth is expel the air that's left in your lungs. They call it the death rattle. Uh-huh. We always hold on to the air to sustain ourselves.
Yeah. Yep.
So we don't need to tank up.
Yeah, it's not a question of quantity. It's a question of efficiency.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Efficiency. In fact, as we rise in pitch, the air has to move faster. Therefore, if there's less pressure behind it, there tends to be an easier way to get to the airflow into the higher notes. Right. We sometimes refer to that as packing the air, don't we? Don't pack the air. Keep the air in flow and speed up. I use the illustration of a garden hose. If you take a garden hose and let the water go, it goes blah, 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 but put your thumb over it and you narrow the opening, then the pressure builds up in the back and the water has to flow out faster and the pitch rises. So you hear the hose go, and the same thing happens with the voice. Titsa has some wonderful examples on the internet of the narrowing of the passaggio. You know, when Pavarotti wrote his book, on how to sing through the passaggio, and he says, I narrow the passaggio. You can see voice teachers all over the country going, what? Isn't he enlarging? Isn't it getting bigger? No, it's getting narrower because the air has to move faster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I call that, teach that concept as the tunnel. I teach them to sing in the tunnel.
Yeah, very good. And how popular are straws and devices these days to create that thing? Well, I had straws on my piano in 1970 when I first started teaching voice because I was a brass player, and it made sense to me. But unfortunately, straws, you listen to the examples on the internet, they're almost always poorly done, and they almost don't solve the problem that they're to solve, and that's to regulate the breath pressure subglottally and supraglottally. So you just use your damn thumb. And as long as your hands are clean, you've got the straw with you at all times. And I often have my choirs do that. It gets young tenors, by the way, into the squealo as fast as anything I know, because they can't overblow it.
Oh, okay. Can you describe, for the folks that are just going to hear this on audio and they won't see you try to do that, can you just kind of describe where you're putting your thumb and,
I put my thumb
what you're doing with your lips?
Yeah, between my lips, but with my teeth apart. I don't close my teeth. And I just blow on the thumb until I feel the pressure is regulated and my break disappears. So I can, if I overblow it, I sound like a moose. But if I build up too much pressure and pack it, it shuts down. But like the Goldilocks principle, if I do it just right, I can go from low and high in my voice. And pardon me, I have a residue of a cold. And it doesn't take me more than 1 or 2 lessons to get breaks out of all voices. It just doesn't take that long. And it doesn't teach me that long to teach breathing because I use the hot air principle. And now we can get on to the business of making music and teaching them to be musicians and not be bottled up in all these technical, self-conscious developing devices, which I just think is too common out there still. And especially among choir directors who have to have passaggio understanding of all the voice parts, not just their own voice part.
Yeah.
And they have to understand where it is that sopranos need to make their adjustments and develop concepts of the cover. I was told by a teacher, never cover. And when I went to study with the great William Bernard at SC, one of the first words he used is, Don, why don't you cover? And I went, what?
Yeah.
I was so upset because I said I was told never to cover. And he said, who told you that? Well, someone didn't know what they were talking about. But the truth is, when the voice aligns itself up and you go from low to high, you don't feel the cover so much as you feel just an adjustment of where the air pressure, as you said, tunnels and tunnels appropriately for the right vowel and the right pitch. So I think there's just a lot of things that we can do more efficiently as teachers. We can create less mental baggage for the student to carry around and really focus on what we're here to do. And that's study the phrase, study the beauty of a beautiful vowel and the appropriate use of consonants depending on the language.
Yes. Now, I want to respond to what you said a second ago about get less mental baggage for the students and for the singers in general, whatever age they are, because I think that's important. And it is the idea that if we can give them these tricks to try, these very simple explanations, the voice is so individual to each singer that if we give them too many words, then they start to put their voice in a box that we have just described. Like, move this body part here, feel this in your abdominals, feel this in your back expanding, all these different types. We can over-explain to the point where then you got, let's say there's 60 singers in the room. You might have 40 singers that explanation makes sense, and then the other 20 you've just alienated because, well, I don't feel it expanding in my back, so I guess I'm doing it wrong. I guess I suck at singing. That kind of thing. You know what I mean?
I absolutely. And I think you're putting that very well. The second part of that is, of all the articulators, that is the movable parts, we have fixed articulators and movable articulators. Which is the one that's least used properly or most misunderstood?
I'm not sure.
I'm putting you on the line. Well, it's a soft palate. And how many people say lift the soft palate? And the soft palate doesn't as much lift as flex.
Right.
And if we teach the soft palate, and that's where these semi-occluded consonants pay a big dividend, we can get the soft palate to move very efficiently, and it really assists the student getting through the upper part of their passaggio, when rather than thinking of lifting the soft palate, we think of almost elongating it like an octopus, and then the tongue doesn't get involved. I guess most teachers I hear just focus on the tongue and we need to be more focused on the lips, for instance. The lips take the burden away from the tongue if we get the vocal tract long enough. And I did a brief blog that's about 6 minutes long, and I'll try to remember to send you a link of it, where I demonstrated how to identify that you're singing a pure vowel.
Okay.
Well, one day I was sitting at the piano. I think I was 22 or 23 years old, and I was singing E, and it felt kind of pinchy and narrow, and I went E, and that doesn't sound very good. And then I went E, and I noticed, oh wait, there's ooh, and then I looked at the vowel triangle and realized that ooh is the fundamental of E. This is why we call E a split vowel. And then I went to A and discovered, well, there's O, it's fundamental. And then I went to Ah. And how many times have you criticized the basses for singing kind of flattish?
Yeah.
Well, there's a quick fix to it. It's not lifting, and it's not singing higher on the pitch, and it's not sitting on top of the pitch. It's elongating the vocal tract, and I'll show you what I mean. Ya, la, if my vocal tract is not properly shaped, the ah will modulate downward almost a half step, just like a French horn when they stick their fist in it.
Okay. Now,
And
so again, for the people who are listening only, what Don's doing is when he sings these vowels, he's moving his hand toward and away from his mouth, changing the length of the vocal tract. Correct me if I'm wrong, which is why you're hearing those different vowels happen as the hand moves.
That's right. It's very easy to get your whole choir to go ew, ew, and realize that ooh, not gets a better E. And the higher we go, the more ooh you add, the more the E becomes clearer, not more E. Right? Yeah. This gets rid of the lateral facial positions. This allows the vowel to have more what people would call rounded or up and down. But I don't say that to them because that just confuses the hell out of them. And as you so well said, you've got 40 people out of your 60 getting it and 20 going, oh, I guess I'm just weird and I'm not any good at this.
Right.
But they can experience this for themselves because you can't muck with acoustics and you can't muck with science. It just is what it is.
Right.
And so excuse me, I know that if I get a pure E and it has a fundamental ooh in it, that my E is correct. Yes. I discovered this, by the way, on the aria Una furtiva lagrima. I struggled for about 3 years with my teacher to get a good clean opening. Una, una, una. And it was always kind of light. And he says, you're not a light lyric, Don. You're more of a dramatic tenor. And I went, well, I don't know how to do what you're asking me to do. And finally, one day it popped. So I went from ooh to una, big, round, full sound. I kind of went, oh, where's that been my whole life? And I realized that on a certain level, I wasn't quite allowing myself in the choral world to use that sound until I worked with people like Robert Shaw or Howard Swan or Charles Hurt. And they wanted that fullness of sound. Roger Wagner, who I went on tour with, who they wanted a mature, big, I wouldn't call it operatic sound as much as just a good, fully bloomed sound.
Yeah.
That had the expressive ability to sing with brilliance, at the same time could sing with the subtlety and the softness of a soft chant.
Yeah.
And I realized that the key to that was pure vowels.
Yeah. Now, I want to add a caveat there, and I want to see how you feel about it. So when you're talking about the pure vowel and you're talking about the E vowel with the oo fundamental as correct, of course, we mean, like, there's lots of correct ways to sing in different styles. But when you're saying correct, I interpret that to mean as the most acoustically efficient version of the vowel. Is that?
You've got it exactly right. That's exactly what I mean. Okay. Now, how we stylize that is how we pronounce the word. In my workshops, I use Day by Day from Godspell as an example. I mean, how awful would it be to hear a singer go, day by day, day by... It makes you want to barf because it's not only not stylistic, it might be, mature operatic style singing, but it's certainly not appropriate to the piece. But right. I can jazz it. Day by day, day by day, or I can musical theater it. Day by day, day. Every style invites its own way of using the language and being efficient, right? If I try to sing gospel music with my opera training, I'll hurt myself. There's a way to sing that appropriately within the culture that is not particularly hurtful to the voice. That's been tested and proven also. It's just that our ears hear that sound, and the only way we can produce it is to add work and effort. And all great styles have efficiency in them, just like all great athletes have their own way of making their body move fluidly through the air, or throw or catch, or however they do it. But they always make it look so dang easy.
Yeah.
Because
Well, and I would say some of those styles too that you just mentioned are styles that kind of inherently to the style, the microphone becomes involved as well. And so they're like it. So that's kind of why I brought that up, because we could say acoustically efficient versions of vowels in a more classical art form where a microphone would almost be considered cheating. And then you can sing a less acoustically efficient vowel if you're using a microphone, and it doesn't mean that you did it wrong. It just means that you now have this technological tool to take away some of that effort.
That's right. I provided the background choir for Barry Manilow for 10 years whenever he came to LA. Every single day of every single performance, he had a 2-hour set the mics correctly rehearsal.
Wow.
Never missed one, never went without doing it. And he knew through his own ear what the technician had to do to tweak it so he could get the sound he wanted, or get the sound feedback from the wedges that he wanted. And, to get the choir there 5 hours before the performance and have them do yet another run through of one voice, and something we did over and over and over again. But that's the perfectionist he was, and that's why his shows always come off so consistent. But that's marrying his talent and the technical art, isn't it? And when you're acoustic on stage with your choir, it's only in the hands and the body of the conductor that you can manipulate those techniques. And so all of this led to my conducting books, which deal with the efficiency of gesture to promote efficiency in the singer.
Yeah, that's awesome. In fact, I've got this book, the APROARTE, here in my hands. It's very thin and very easy to get through. It's very short, but I actually found some really interesting and valuable things even in the introduction.
Thank you.
Which is, typically I just skip the introduction and I go right to, the beginning of the actual part, or chapter 1. But I found here a list that you put in here, which I wanted to bring up on the show, just a couple of them. I want to highlight a couple of them that you call the foundations of your teaching process. And one of the things that I found interesting here was you said, by the way, and I'll just tell for people who are listening, there's a list of 8 or 9 of these kind of foundations that are in there that they're all valuable, all worth getting the book just for those, I think. And then there's lots of other great stuff. But here's one. Observe where the client applies energy in the body and aid the client on addressing dynamic energy versus static energy. Work towards physical balance and muscular coordination. So I'm assuming what you mean by this is that one of your jobs as the teacher of singing, whether it be conducting a choir, teaching a voice lesson, etc., is to spend some time just watching what they do, watching how the singers are spending energy. Where does it seem to be happening in their body? Can you tell us more about that and what that means to you, and why was it worth mentioning?
Yeah, I'll everything I've learned comes with a story, doesn't it? I was studying with a teacher, and I was singing, and I was facing away from him. He couldn't see me. He was a former accompanist for the Metropolitan Opera. And he stopped me and said, "Don, don't do that with your face." I went, "What?" He says, "Don't sing out the left side of your mouth. You're curving your mouth." And I said, "Michael, you can't see me." I said, "No, but I can hear you." In other words, you can train your ears to get so sensitive to a person, whether they're listening through their left ear or their right ear, or they're balanced up and down, or whether they understand the halo of sound above the head. All those are observable and can be learned by the teacher. So I don't really need to look at the posture as much as I need to listen deeply and carefully and silently in my brain. I'm not trying to think of what I'm trying to say. I'm not worried about whether I'm going to communicate. I just want to hear what they have to offer. And when I point this out, I want to make sure it's something they can self-identify and that they can self-work on and work out. Because I'll say in the very first lesson to every student I ever teach, first of all, what may I do for you today? I want to know their agenda. And two, I'm here to turn the keys to your voice over to you. I don't want my voice in your head. I want you to know what your body's telling you, and so that you can audiate and predict the sound that you want to make and have the body respond appropriately to that. So you caught one of my key ideas. I think it's so important to listen more and talk less, and to observe. And if you can't hear it, for instance, when I work with conducting students, I often don't look at them at all because I can hear what their arm is doing to affect the sound. I can hear what their body is doing. And one of my colleagues finally said one day, how come you don't look at them? And I said, I don't need to, I can hear it. Can't you hear the sound they're producing? And it's like if you have three conductors conduct your choir, I guarantee your choir will sound totally different. And if you have three different voice teachers, what is the most influential thing? And I think I might say this in I don't remember whether I wrote this. If I didn't, I should add it. What's the most influential thing a teacher has to teaching voice? Your own voice. So when I'm in front of my choir, I talk like this. I don't talk like this. This is for the mic and the podcast. But I talk with this projected voice. And I use that as a model that they can sing into so easily. And if you've got a choir that's breathy, I guarantee you've got a conductor that talks like this to them. And if you've got a choir with a really great bass section, I guarantee you're in front of a conductor that's a really great bass. It's pretty much that simple. But what can we learn from each other so that I can be a good soprano for my soprano section, even though I'm a tenor, right? And how can I encourage my bass to sing with a fuller, bigger sound, even though I can't sing those notes down there?
Right.
Well, in honor choirs, I do this all the time. I'll say, the choir will go, yeah, 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 yeah. And I say, choir, thank you very much. You just did this, but I would like this. Now, for your listeners, what I did is I demonstrated what they did facially, and then I demonstrated what I wanted more correctly, quote unquote, for efficiency's sake. And the choir changes its sound immediately. I don't have to talk about tall vowels, drop the jaw, move your lip. I don't have to talk about all. They get it right away. Suggesting what? That gesture communicates more than our words.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I have a similar thing that I do with choirs that is just approached a little bit differently, but I think the same concept. Again, people who can see the video will have the advantage I'll describe, but what I will simply do is I'll get in front of the choir and I'll shape my mouth in some kind of way, whether it be like, and I'm moving like in a wide smile, or I'll just make an ooh lip shape. And I won't make any sound at all, and I'll just tell them to audiate the sound that would come out if I made a sound. Just to get them to the point where they can look around the room and do that with each other as well.
That is absolutely brilliant. And I add a word to that in my book called somatic sensory. It's a made-up word. Somos meaning body, and somatic meaning it's happening beneath the level of consciousness. And sensory meaning we sense it. So we spend a lot of time about audiation. And then we tend to go right to proprioception. That is our outer body experience. But for singers, I don't do that. I go to sensory somatic, and I do it this way. I say E, and they say E. I say A, they say A. I say ah. Now I say, pretend you say E. Now pretend you say A. Now pretend you say ah. Sensory somatic. Mm-hmm. They know the feeling internally before they produce the sound. Yep. And that hooks audiation up more quickly to the intention of singing something expressively and musically than anything I know. It's so fast.
Yes, ooh, I like that. And I also have another one. So I do a bridge between the two, which is unvoiced vowels. So have them whisper through vowel shapes, because then, so for example, if I want them to breathe the vowel that they're about to sing, I'll have them on purpose make a very loud breath so that they can hear what vowel. Let's say I'm about to sing ah, I'll tell them to breathe. And can you hear that vowel before you make the sound? Because a lot of times, especially with young singers, what we'll hear and then try to sing ah, and I'm like, well, do you feel how much harder work that is? Now, what if you?
I call the breath you're taking, the guppy breath.
Yeah, Uh-huh. It's very,
And
and then,
the only caveat to that, and I love this illustration, I think that's brilliant what you're doing, is that when we make a breathy sound, we have to
uh-huh.
make sure it's the mouth and not the larynx. Because if it's the breath passing over the larynx, then the larynx is too high. And if the larynx is too high, we can't produce the singer's formant.
Mm-hmm.
So the posture of the larynx is as important as anything. That's why the hot air breath works so brilliantly. It
Yeah.
puts the larynx in the breathing mechanism and out of the swallowing posture. And I don't have to do anything more but think of fogging up my glasses.
Yeah.
That's why I love it so much.
Yeah.
I've used that now for about 20 years, and it's been really effective.
That is great. Yeah, no, I like that. I've heard other ways of expressing the hot air. I've heard people say like drink water is another one because it tends to get them in that position of release of the larynx.
Except the problem with anything that we say that has to do with swallowing tends to involve the back of the tongue getting ready to lift the hyoid bone, to lift the larynx for the swallowing gesture. That's the only reason I'm cautious about that.
Yeah. Yeah,
I think with a great teacher who's paying attention and managing the student well, all those things work.
Right.
Brilliant.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I definitely like the hot air thing. I've seen I've seen a video. I saw a video, I think it was like maybe even made in the 70s or 80s, but do you remember Fritz Mountford?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he has a video that was at least well known when I was in undergrad, which is he demonstrates the toothy E grin breath versus the hooty O breath, and also talks about how the air is different temperatures depending on how you're shaping all those things. And again, they're tricks that I see these things as kind of like we said when we first signed on. They're things that simply demystify the process, because then each singer they might look a little bit different than their neighbor when they do all these things because their bodies are all shaped the same. But if we can get them all to feel the same sensations, then they're going to start to align a lot of things.
So in the book yeah, you're exactly right. In the book I go into some detail about the semi-occluded consonants and what their value is to the various muscles of articulation. And I said this to you in writing many months ago, and we want the articulators to learn to their independent actions so they become interdependent. What tends to happen is that we learn actions that become codependent. For instance, I lift the soft palate, but I'm really lifting my larynx and my tongue. And that's the universal thing I say all the time. If I say to a student, and I've never said it by the way, if I say to a student, lift your soft palate, I guarantee their tongue bunches up and their larynx goes up, and the soft palate does freaking nothing.
Yep.
But I have exercises for the soft palate, and exercises for the lips, and exercises for the tongue. For the semi-occluded, all deal with the position of the three muscles of the tongue, which the one we don't want is the one that swallows. The one we want to get E is for it to lift without lifting the larynx.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's beautiful, and these are also so valuable. If it's okay, I want to kind of take us now in a little bit more of a specific direction towards this nested hierarchy concept again, because now I've got here in front of me the actual list. So your anagram or and I want to read them out again. You said them at the beginning, but I want to read them out again so the audience can have them fresh in their mind. They are audiation, posture, respiration, onset, articulators, resonance, technique, and efficiency and eloquence, which both start with E. Now, when you describe these in the book and when you describe them in your concept of teaching, is it listed in that order because you believe it should be taught in that order? Or tell us a little bit more about why it's that order.
I don't feel the need to teach. I work with an awful lot of professional singers, and I'm very fortunate to have some really world-class singers who come by and check on their efficiency with me. And that doesn't mean I can't coach. It just means that my dedication to the idea of efficient vocal production has been kind of a lifelong journey for me. And particularly because I stand in front of a lot of amateur voices, how can I get them to sound sophisticated without turning it into a big deal, right? But you can't have resonance if you don't have good onset. And you can't have good onset if your posture isn't correct. And I include the larynx as part of posture. All the parts of your body can be postured. And you can't make a great sound if you don't know what sound you want to intend to make. That's audiation, right? So the order is very purposeful.
Yep.
And it just simply says that our audiation informs our posture, and our posture informs our breath, how we take the breath. Your beautiful example of breathing in the vowel before you sing a word. You don't just take and then try to reshape the vowel. It's too late. It kills the unity. And choirs that know how to breathe together, they become quite good.
Yeah.
They really do. And that then once my respiration is under control and the correct muscles, understanding that we have inhalation muscles and exhalation muscles, and that the suspension between those two is how we create this beauty, like the hot air. That's a suspension. That I can't get a great onset if my respiration isn't properly controlled. And onset then is a product of proper articulation, and articulation for singers is resonance. We would say an instrumentalist is resonant. We'd say articulation is how they address a particular note by attack, sustain, and release. But for singers, articulation is the art of resonance, and enunciation is the art of efficiently producing consonants that don't disrupt the beauty of the onset. And so, for instance, we study Italian early on. Why? Because the vowel dictates the consonant. And why do we study German later? Because the consonant develops the strategy for the vowel. They're the yin and the yang of each other. But I wouldn't start with German unless they were German. Because to get the beauty of the vowel set into the consonant is a better pathway than trying to get consonants to determine the vowels. Now, if I were a pop singer, I might spend my time on consonant usage on a mic, because the vowels can be often diphthongs and triphthongs, because that's part of the art of saying the word, right?
Yeah.
Day, you go immediately from open to close, where the opera singer stays open as long as they can.
Yeah.
So, yes, I do think this order matters. And I do think that if you're going to work on respiration, but they have poor postural activity going on, you're just kind of wasting your time.
Yeah. Okay, so let me frame it this way and see how you feel about it. So it's not designed to be a teach this, then teach this, then teach this. It's really more of a diagnostic tool for if there is a problem, back up in the steps and see how far back in the steps is the problem really happening.
A nested hierarchy is a description of junior to senior relationships. Junior relationship being like a quarter note, and a senior relationship being like a whole note. So how many quarter notes does it take to make up a whole note? Well, if you don't have established the quarter note's value, we know that there will always be four, no matter what, but we don't know how we're going to express them in terms of time. For instance, 2/2 means I'm going to get 2 quarter notes per beat, and I'm going to get 2 half notes per measure, and I'm going to get 1 whole note per measure, as an example. But what do you do in 3/4 time? There is no senior whole note anymore. There is no senior value. The quarter note goes to the dotted half. So my point is that if you teach from the senior point of view and the juniors are glossed over, you will miss many opportunities to solve problems. Juniors solve senior relationships. This is very Piagetian and not very B.F. Skinner. B.F. Skinner says, let's look at the mature adult, let's look at the whole and see what those parts are. And this says we are whole at any moment, we are alive. A 3-year-old is a whole human being. Now, is their development yet to go on? Of course, but they're still a whole human being. They are complete in every way they can be, except we wouldn't ask them to do certain tasks, and we wouldn't ask them to think about certain things. And I think of that with the singer. I want to identify where they are in the maturity of the vocal range. And that that just starts as simply as, I'm sure, what you do. So when I have a student come in, I say, identify your issues. What are your issues? Oh, I don't have enough breath. I can never sing along. I bet you I get that 9 out of 10 times. I said, well, if we could solve that today, would you be happy? And they look at me like, well, that's not possible. I've lived with this problem for 10 years. And we solve it in 5 minutes. And they go, how'd that happen? I said, well, you did it. You discovered that you had a bad relationship with your breath flow. So we solved that by correcting some of your posture, making sure your audiation was clear, making sure your onset was effortless and not glottal, particularly, right? Let's learn glottal technique later on when it's used as an actual technique. Or my friend who teaches Billie Eilish, let's teach what a breathy technique can be when it's done well. And she's made $1 gazillion off of that breathy sound.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's a fine opera singer, and he knows everything about the voice there is to know, yet he taught her how to do that well.
Yeah, and that's kind of related to what I was saying earlier about certain types of singing that where the microphone can let her do the breathy thing. And it's not doesn't mean that she's trying to sing with resonance and failing. She's making more money than either of us, and she's singing a certain kind of way. It's not a correct versus incorrect thing. It's learning how the voice works. And if you're a student of singing, whether you're trying to sound like Billy or Pavarotti, then the idea would be to like know how to explain why you sound the way you sound, and I think that's why this book is so useful for people who are needing to have that kind of like diagnostic tool sitting on their desk close at hand, is because if it's, I think of it like an owner's manual. When I'm teaching students, I want you to have an owner's manual for your voice, so that if I'm not standing there to tell you what's going on, when you leave my circle, when you're no longer my student, if I give you nothing else, then you're going to walk out of my studio or my class with some type of owner's manual. And I kind of see I see this book as kind of structured in that way. It's almost like an owner's manual.
Well, there's so many excellent books out there that go into great detail about a lot of things. Richard Miller, of course, William Bernard, who was my teacher. I can go on and on with a list of people that have written. Barbara's last name is not coming to me right now, but she was starts with a D. I'll think of it and then I'll write it to you. And I apologize to her if she's ever comes across this. But there are some really brilliant people out there who have written, and I decided to put in the back of the book, as you might notice, links to all the things that I talk about and I've lectured on that add hours of weight to this book, because I didn't feel like rewriting all that. I just wanted, as you say, an owner's manual that someone could quickly read and go, oh, I can do that. Oh, I can do that. And, oh, I'm accessing now more of my voice. My range is getting bigger. My voice is becoming more expressive because I'm not taking out the science. I'm building it on the science, but I'm not thinking about the science. I'm thinking about making music.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I've been so dumb lucky. I've worked with some of the best conductors in the world, and I sang with some of the most famous choral guys. And for some of them, I could sing effortlessly. And for others, I had to kind of work hard to use my best techniques in order to satisfy them, because their gesture didn't allow me to have my best singing. Easily the best sound I ever made in a choral ensemble was for Bob Shaw. I mean, my God. And that's because of his rhythmic precision and his evening out all the ebbs and flows of lines. Well, that's not very stylish, but boy, it sure is vocally friendly.
Yeah.
So I can say, and I apologize to anybody who's offended by this, I can't listen to some of these recordings anymore because they don't represent, to me, the most expressive style. But I could say that when I sang for Roger Wagner, he got things out of my voice that I just like, wow, where did that come from? Because he was so athletic. And so, many people don't know he was an Olympic athlete for France. He was a tennis athlete for France. And so he came with real physical tools, as Bob Shaw was doing. And then I stayed with Charles Hurt, who was my mentor at SC, and Rod Eichenberger and Howard Swan. I mean, kind of a who's who of the choral world. And I sang soloists for Helmut Rilling. I could tell you who it was easy and I could tell you who it was hard.
Yeah.
But I could tell you what I had to bring to the table. And I want every singer to bring to the table their voice with their idea. Someone wrote on I think it was, could have been on the choral director thing. I don't think it would have been on you, because I think you would have challenged. It says, you don't change your technique for every conductor. You sing with a technique and you bring it to the table. Well, then you're a very bad singer. Because if you can't adjust your technique per conductor, and if you can't mold different sounds, then you just ain't got the real goods. Mm-hmm. If you've got one sound and one sound only, good luck to you. I couldn't possibly hire you.
Yeah. Well, and I think actually that's funny because I think that goes both ways. It goes for the conductor as well. If you're going to say, well, my choirs, they sound the same on every song of every style. I do know some conductors who do that on purpose. Like this is how my choirs sing, and it does not matter if we're singing a Renaissance polyphonic piece, or if we're singing a modern vocal jazz chart, or if we're singing a Brahms romantic style thing. That my choirs will sing with these vowels and these articulations and this color of resonance, because that's how my choir sings. And I don't get it.
Well, fortunately, I think you were raised better than that. Although if you were raised 40 years ago, you might well believe that, particularly if you came from certain choral schools. As I'm pretty sure you know in the Harold Decker book that Howard Swan wrote that article on the 6 choral schools. And he was sitting at SC writing that article about Shaw, sitting behind me. I was singing tenor for Shaw in a LA workshop doing the Bach B minor. And he was writing about it. And I turned to him and said, Howard, what are you writing? He says, well, I'm trying to capture the essence of the Shaw approach. And thank God we don't believe in those choral schools anymore. I know people who test for that because they think that's important to know. Well, historically, maybe, but, I studied with Charles Hurt, who was from the school of eclecticism. Palestrina was Palestrina, Debussy was Debussy, Beethoven was Beethoven, Mozart was Mozart. Those were the sound ideals. And we had to have a moldable instrument to make those noises. And I say noises very purposely, because I have to be out of the opinion that there's one good way to sing. There just isn't. And so efficiency becomes the gateway to total expression, in my opinion. Because when you're efficient, you can manipulate your voice to do amazing things.
Yeah.
And when you're not, you're stuck.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a really good way of putting it. If the habit is efficiency, then the flexibility is the result.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Don, I think this is going to be very, very helpful for folks. I'm going to take us in one more direction out of your book, and because it's got, like I said, I would probably describe it as something a person could read through in an hour and a half. Yeah, hour and a half to 2 hours, depending on your speed of reading, but then also ends up serving as a diagnostic tool, like we said before. Now, one of the things that I find interesting here is just how simple even the layout of it is. So chapter 1 is the functional areas of the voice. Chapter 2 is a description of the nested hierarchy, which we've already discussed. Chapter 3 is tips for rehearsal and practice. And then chapter 4 it's kind of I'll call it the nerd chapter, where there's like pictures and descriptions of vocal anatomy and different types of illustrations, including, I noticed, a nice close-up of your nose. So
yes. Well, that's how I teach the soft palate motion, is to place your fingers on here and go, ah, 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 ah. And in Italian, they call that the voce di strega, or the witch's cackle. And the witch's cackle is used in Johnny Schicchi. The mayor makes that noise. But it also shapes the soft palate properly. And now, once you bring the soft palate back into a closed position against passive cushion, then you get a great vowel. That is, by definition, the legit belt.
Yeah, that's really good. I wanted to do one more that I found in here because, of course, folks know that I'm really big on at least young singers having the opportunity to rehearse a cappella.
Yes.
And you have a section in here it's a very brief section on the use of the piano. And I think this is really interesting because it hits on one of the things that I think is really important, too, for people to remember. That piano is, and you can feel free to add more, but this is just the part I'm going to pull out and highlight. Remember that the piano is a percussion instrument, with hardened felt hammers hitting groups of steel strings, stretched so their vibrations inspire sounding board to vibrate. Played too heavily, the piano will encourage effort in the singer, especially at the onset. And this is one of the reasons that I don't let my kids have the notes played for them when they're learning songs and when they're learning, because they're in that acquiring literacy stage too. And it actually has to do with the nature of how the piano creates the pitch. It's almost like If you look at it on like a Voce Vista video kind of like sound wave analyzer kind of software, you see a very sharp blast of the pitch instantly because it's a percussion instrument. Whereas the voice, you see almost like a crescendo to a pitch when you look at almost like a stringed instrument. And so what that I've found over the years is if I'm teaching kids to learn how to audiate and onset and read music all at the same time, that having the piano play along is almost like giving them the right answer so quickly that it discourages them from doing all those other things. And so instead, what I do is I use the piano for what you say in here, for harmonic context. Rather than play, here's the note you're supposed to sing, here's the chord it goes with, let's sing with the chords, etc. And I find that completely changes the way they sing. Thoughts?
Absolutely true. I honor that in you. I know that you've dedicated a great deal of your teaching pedagogy to let's rip the Band-Aid off and teach people to be musicians.
Yeah.
And quit just spoon feeding them. Let's stop doing 4 pieces a year because that's all we can teach, because we're teaching it essentially by rote.
Yeah.
And teach them to be readers. My last year teaching high school, my chamber singer sang 82 pieces. 82 pieces, almost all of them a cappella.
Yeah.
Because they became musicians. But yeah, the first 3 months are bumpy.
Yeah, they are.
But the
It's
rest
an investment.
of the year is so cool because they can actually open a score and know their way around it.
Right.
So I do appreciate this opportunity very much, Crystal, once again, talk to you about these things. But again, in the back of the book are, I think, over 40 online connections to my lectures, to blogs, to various things, which will flesh out even more experiences of what I'm talking, because I think it's hard, as you know, to talk about these things and not have a constant demonstration of how to do them.
Yeah.
So I believe that's very valuable. And I do believe that when you're pithy and when you're to the point, that in the rereading, your experience will actually be reinforced and deepened. I think so often when I read Bernard for the first time, I was so lost. Thank God he was my voice teacher, because I could hear his voice say those sentences. And it made all the difference in the world of understanding. And I have an August ritual that I've now done for however long, from 18 years old I am now at 75. I read his book again. And I always find something I went, oh, dang, there it is. And so I have to give homage to him. A little bit of my approach to all this is mechanical. And therefore I felt that it had to have a sequence that it's like trying to run your car without a motor, right?
Right.
If the motor isn't working, you ain't got much to go on, right?
Yeah.
Now, maybe cosmetically in bad shape, but that can all be taken care of. And at the end of the day, let me just say one thing about this. All music is gestural, and all singing is gestural. And hooking those things up as fast as we can. And your beautiful example of having them audiate, then go to somatic sensory, and then produce pitches is a more complete and authentic approach than having it played for them and having it repeat back, because they don't turn on that part of their brain, that high right brain, where music happens. And so I get tired of hearing what I call the monkey choirs at ACDA. They are flawless, they are pure, and they've obviously been listening to a lot of recordings. And as well as the conductor. I know some conductors can't study a piece unless there's a recording of it. And I don't listen to recordings hardly at all until after I perform it. And then I listen to see where I've made my poor judgments, or I haven't judged as completely. And it's fun to listen to some of the great conductors and you go, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way. And, but to me, the score is telling you a story. And I think that one of the beautiful things that you do and that I attempt to do is help people to read the story with functional literacy. There's an estimate that the United States is 75% functionally illiterate. Doesn't mean we don't know the word cat or how to spell it. It means we don't know how to use it in context. Boy, that was a cool jazz session. That was a cool cat. Boy, that tractor is one of the best cats I've ever seen. It's not just a furry little animal.
Right.
And so if we can't understand words in context, if we can't understand notes in context, if we can't understand the voice of the composer, It's one of the things that got my relationship with Lortzen off is I made the sound that he had in his ear. And that came through the tuning principles that you know about that I do. And when he heard his chords sung in tune in his own ear, and he's a pianist, by the way, and you notice how sparse his piano is and how arpeggiated it is most of the time and how rhythmically active. Well, that's to avoid the tuning anomalies. And I sat with him for many an hour and made those tones, and he bought in and became one of my greatest supporters. So again, I applaud what you're doing, and I can't tell you how much I support the philosophy. And I know philosophy is not action, but you got to start somewhere. And this book is a brief 83-page philosophy book.
Yeah, that's great. And now, before we sign off, though, make sure you tell us how to get it. Where do we go to get it?
All my books are on Amazon. I now have 7 books. I just published this week this book that you're looking at, APROARTE, in Spanish.
Yeah.
And so I'm making it available to my friends in Costa Rica and Spain, Mexico, and many people in the United States who have students that aren't that comfortable with English yet, but can get the book, and I have it in Spanish. So you can go Amazon.com, not my most favorite place, but they have this Kindle publishing that makes it very easy for folks like me to publish and not have to deal with publishers taking all your money away from you.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Don, this has been fascinating, as always. Thank you so much for doing the work that you're doing and making this accessible for people. I will try to get the word out.
I appreciate it so much. You guys have a great year coming up.
Great. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of a conversation. If you are still hearing my voice, that means you're one of the MVPs, one of the diehards, one of the real ones, as the kids say. So if you are willing on the way out to check out a few different ways that you can help me continue to make this show high quality. 1, use the promo code. That's the biggest one. At Sight Reading Factory, at mymusicfolders.com, at mychoirropes.com, at graphitepublishing.com, and endeavormusicpublishing.com. All of those take the Choralosophy checkout code, and of course now the newest one is 3-Minute Theory. You can get a 15% discount when you enter Choralosophy at checkout there. And of course, going to Apple Podcasts and leaving a positive review is very helpful there, and sharing the episodes to your colleagues in real life and on social media. All of those things are incredibly helpful and allow me to continue to create this resource for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.